Dear learners, a warm welcome to this module on approach to counseling. I'm delighted to have you here as we embark on an interesting journey of understanding how counseling actually works in practice. Well, before we begin, let me share with you what we aim to achieve through this module. By the end of this module, you'll be able to understand the concept of counseling in its true spirit, become familiar with the different approach to counseling, that is, directive, non-directive, and eclectic. Learn about the steps involved in both directive and non-directive approach. Reflect on the merits and demerits of each counseling method. So, our purpose here is not just to know about theories, but also to appreciate their practical application in real counseling situations. Dear learners, have you noticed how counseling quietly happens all around us? Parents guiding their children, doctors reassuring their patients, lawyers advising their clients, or teachers supporting their students. Each of these everyday moments carries the spirit of counseling. It's not limited to a single place or problem. Rather, it touches many aspects of human life. But then, when we talk about counseling in a professional sense, what exactly do we mean? Well, to put it simply, counseling is a purposeful process of interaction. It's designed to help individuals gain a clear understanding of themselves and the situations they are facing. Counseling brings direction and clarity into the person's life, and it assists them in developing or refining their beliefs, setting meaningful goals, and shaping healthier patterns of behavior for the future. Now, dear learners, this means counseling is not just a conversation or a friendly chat. It's an intentional, structured process led by trained professionals who are committed to help people grow. At its heart, counseling is about creating a safe, supportive, and non-judgmental space where individuals can explore their challenges openly, reflect on their experiences, and move towards healthier choices. In our everyday lives, we often rely on advice from friends or family. While that advice may be comforting, professional counseling goes a step further. It does not impose ready-made answers, but instead empowers individuals to discover their own strengths and solutions. It helps them move from confusion to clarity, from helplessness to hope, and from uncertainty to confidence. In this way, counseling is both supportive because it helps people manage stress, anxiety, or conflicts in the present, developmental because it equips them with skills, insights, and self-awareness that prepare them for future challenges. So, when we talk about counseling in the professional sense, we are referring to a process that not only addresses problems but also promotes growth. It's about helping individuals live more purposeful, balanced, and fulfilling lives. Counseling is an interaction that enables individuals to gain clarity about themselves and their choices. Edwin Lewis explained it as a process where a troubled person communicates with a trained helper, who provides information and feedback in such a way that the client develops healthier behaviors. Carl Rogers in 1951 described counseling as a series of face-to-face encounters designed to encourage meaningful change in a person's emotions, attitudes, and behaviors. Similarly, Wren in 1962 called it a purposeful and dynamic relationship in which one person, the counselor, helps another resolve conflicts and reach healthier conclusions. So, dear learners, whether we look at it through the lens of Rogers, Wren, or Lewis, the message is the same. Counseling is not about giving orders or imposing solutions. It's about creating a safe space where individuals feel understood, valued, and supported in finding their own way forward. And now, let's move ahead to explore the first major approach to counseling, that is, directive counseling. This method was originally developed in the 1930s as part of vocational guidance. The basic idea is simple. The counselor, with their expertise, is better equipped to understand the problem and suggest practical solutions. Directive counseling gives more weight to rational decision making than to emotions. That's why it's often applied in academic, vocational, or clinical settings where efficiency and clarity are important. Now we are moving towards the steps in directive counseling. Williamson suggested 6 systematic steps in this approach. The counselor collects detailed information about the client through interviews, case histories, or psychological tests. The gathered data is organized to highlight the client's strengths, weaknesses, and background. The counselor interprets the information to identify the nature and causes of the problem. A prediction is made about how the problem might develop in the future. Advice, suggestions, and recommendations are given to guide the client towards solutions. Later, meetings are held to check progress, ensure the plan is working, and deal with new issues if they arise. Now, dear learners, pause for a moment and think about this process. Doesn't it remind you of what a doctor usually does? First, the doctor collects and studies the symptoms carefully. Then comes the diagnosis, followed by prescribing the right treatment, and finally, regular checkups to see how the patient is improving. In the very same way, directive counseling follows a structured and systematic pathway. Here, the counselor doesn't just sit back and listen passively. Instead, they take the lead, analyzing the situation, giving clear guidance, and continuing to monitor the client's growth. This makes directive counseling not only logical and organized, but also very result-oriented. And this is exactly why it proves to be effective in areas like academic choices, career guidance, or vocational decisions, situations where individuals are often seeking clarity, direction, and practical advice. Now, let's see what's the role of the counselor in directive counseling. Well, the counselor plays the leading role. They gather and interpret information, forecast possible outcomes, and recommend steps for the client to take. The client's role is more passive here, often following the guidance provided. Now let's move to the merits of directive counseling. It saves time and provides clear direction. It focuses on the problem with objectivity. It's structured and practical. It's particularly useful in academic and vocational contexts. But this approach has certain demerits as well. It may create dependence on the counselor. Clients may miss opportunity for self-exploration and emotional growth. It may not be effective for deep emotional issues. So, in simple words, directive counseling is like a guiding signpost. It shows the way forward with clarity and confidence, but sometimes at the cost of limiting the client's independence. Now, think about it for a moment. Haven't we all looked for such signposts at some stages in life? Maybe when choosing a subject, deciding on a career, or even making a quick decision where we felt lost. In those moments, having someone knowledgeable to guide us feels reassuring, didn't it? This is exactly the strength of directive counseling. It provides direction when confusion feels overwhelming. Yet at the same time, it reminds us that too much reliance on guidance may prevent us from developing the ability to make decisions on our own. So, dear learners, as you reflect on this approach, ask yourself, would I prefer a counselor who gives me clear answers, or would I rather explore the answers myself? This reflection will prepare us well as we move ahead to explore the next approach, non-directive counseling, also known as client-centered counseling or person-centered counseling. Dear learners, in this approach, the central role shifts away from the counselor and rests firmly with the client. Unlike directive counseling, where the counselor takes the lead and provides advice, here it's the client who takes charge of the process. The counselor's task is not to direct, but to create an atmosphere where the client feels safe, accepted, and free to express themselves fully. This method was developed by the famous humanistic psychologist in the 1940s. Rogers firmly believed that every individual has within themselves the capacity for growth and self-understanding. What they often lack is the right environment, an environment of empathy, acceptance, and non-judgment to unlock that potential. And this is exactly what non-directive counseling provides. According to Rogers, 3 essential conditions must be present for this approach to work effectively. The counselor must be genuine, honest, and transparent in the relationship. The counselor must deeply understand the client's feelings and reflect that understanding back to them. The client must feel valued and accepted without any judgment or criticism. When these conditions are present, the client begins to explore feelings openly, confront their difficulties with courage, and gradually discover their own solutions. Now, let's dive into the general process that non-directive counseling usually follows. First step is defining the problematic situations. The client describes their situation in their own words without being interrupted or steered in a particular direction. Next, free expression of feelings. The client is encouraged to openly share emotions, thoughts, fears, and hopes. Then comes development of insight. Through reflection and exploration, the client begins to understand themselves and their situation more clearly. Next, classification of feelings. The client distinguishes between positive and negative emotions, learning how to regulate and channel them better. And lastly, termination. The counseling process comes to a close when the client feels confident, empowered, and capable of handling their issues independently. Now, the role of the counselor in non-directive counseling. Let's reflect on what the counselor actually does in this process. Unlike directive counseling, where the counselor takes charge, here the role is more subtle but equally powerful. The counselor becomes a facilitator rather than an advisor. Their main responsibility is to create a warm and supportive environment where the client feels truly free to open up. This means listening with patience, showing genuine empathy, and accepting the client without any judgment. The counselor reflects the client's thoughts and feelings back to them, helping them gain clarity. But importantly, the counselor does not impose opinions or give ready-made solutions. Now let's explore the merits of non-directive counseling. This approach has many important strengths. First, it builds independence as clients make their own decisions and learn to trust their judgment. Second, it promotes emotional growth by giving them space and explore feelings and gain deeper self-understanding. Third, it develops self-confidence since Discovering their own solutions helps clients see themselves as capable and resourceful. Lastly, non-directive counseling is especially helpful for personal and emotional concerns like identity struggles, relationship conflicts, or self-esteem issues, where empathy and acceptance are more valuable than quick answers. Now we have demerits of non-directive counseling. Like every approach, this one also has its limitations. Because it relies so heavily on the client's self-exploration, it also depends greatly on the client to reflect. Some individuals may not feel comfortable taking such responsibility for their own decisions. And in urgent situations, for example, when a person needs immediate guidance in a crisis, non-directive counseling may not always be the most practical choice. So, dear learners, we now have a clear picture. Directive counseling gives structure and guidance, while non-directive counseling empowers the client to find their own answers. Each has its strengths and each has its challenges, but what if we do not have to choose strictly between one or the other? What if we could blend the best of the two approaches? That is where our third approach comes in, that is, eclectic counseling. The word eclectic means choosing from the different sources, and that's exactly what this approach does. Instead of relying on one rigid method, the counselor combines the strengths of directive and non-directive counseling and may even use techniques from other schools of psychology. This approach was popularized by F.C. Thorne in 1950s, who believed no single method works for all situations. Since every client and problem is unique, eclectic counseling gives the counselor flexibility to offer guidance when needed, or to step back, or let the client explore solutions on their own. Although eclectic counseling is flexible, it still follows a systematic pattern. The process generally includes the following steps. First step is identifying the problem. The counselor begins by understanding the issue at hand through interviews, observations, or tests. Second one, analyzing the causes. Once the problem is recognized, the counselor explores possible causes and contributing factors. Then, formulating a strategy. A tentative plan is made, drawing from the different approaches to best suit the client's needs. Next, creating the right environment. The counseling space is kept warm, respectful, and supportive to encourage openness. Then, encouraging client participation. Through dialogue and reflection, the client is motivated to build their own resources and solutions. Then we have resolving related issues. Sometimes secondary or hidden concerns come up, and these are addressed to strengthen adjustment. Lastly, reviewing progress. Like in other approaches, follow-up is important to see whether the chosen strategies are effective. So, eclectic counseling has a structure, but it's not rigid. It gives the counselor the freedom to adapt each step to the unique needs of the client. In eclectic counseling, the counselor plays a flexible role. Sometimes they may guide firmly, like in directive counseling, while at the other times they may simply facilitate reflection, as in non-directive counseling. The key is balance. The counselor must know when to take charge and when to step back, and how to shift smoothly between these positions. They must also maintain mutual trust and confidence so that the client feels secure in the process. Now let's move to merits of eclectic counseling. This approach brings together several important strengths. Flexibility. It allows the counselor to adapt to each client's personality, needs, and situations. Holistic view. It takes into account emotional, cognitive, and behavioral aspects rather than focusing on just one. It avoids rigidity by combining useful techniques from different methods. It makes space for both the counselor's expertise and the client's self-exploration. It works well for complex and multi-layered problems where one single method may fall short. Now let's talk about demerits of eclectic counseling. Because it borrows from different methods, it may sometimes feel vague or inconsistent. Risk of confusion. If not applied thoughtfully, the mixing of techniques may confuse the client. Skill requirement. It demands a highly skilled counselor who can judge wisely when to use which approach. Over-dependence on counselor style. The success of the process often depends heavily on the counselor's personal judgment. So, in simple terms, eclectic counseling is like having a full toolbox at your disposal. Instead of relying on just one tool, the counselor selects the right combination depending on the nature of the task. It brings together the strength of structure from directive counseling and the openness of non-directive counseling, making it both practical and adaptive. But dear learners, it's important here that eclectic counseling works best only when the counselor applies it with care, sensitivity, and professional wisdom. It's not about randomly mixing methods, but about thoughtfully tailoring the process to meet the unique needs of the client. With this, we have now explored all three major approaches to counseling: directive, non-directive, and eclectic. Now the question is, which approach is the best? Well, the truth is that there is no single best approach. It all depends on the nature of the problem, the personality of the client, and the professional judgment of the counselor. A skilled counselor knows when to give direction and when to step back and when to blend methods. As we come to the end of this module, let's reflect on what we have learned. Counseling at its heart is about creating a safe, respectful, and empathetic relationship where individuals can grow, resolve conflicts, and make healthier choices. Different approaches provide different pathways. Directive counseling offers clarity and direction, focusing on the counselor's expertise. Non-directive counseling nurtures independence and emotional growth by focusing on the client's inner resources. Eclectic counseling combines both approaches, offering flexibility and adaptability. So, dear learners, counseling is not just about techniques, it's about relationships. It's about listening deeply, respecting the person in front of you, and guiding them with wisdom and care. With this, we conclude our module on the approach to counseling. I hope this session has given you both knowledge and inspiration to reflect on how approaches can be applied in real life. Thank you for your attention.